Hello, my fellow knights and warriors, and this is going to be the second part of my Cry Havoc tutorial, and today I will try to cover movement rules. And at the beginning, we need to clarify one more important thing. The very first version of Cry Havoc had different movement points than the further games. They were lower. For example, it was 8 for horsemen and 6 for non-armored warriors, 4 for armored warriors, etc., etc. So these are the original version of movement abilities, but they were later changed. I believe it was with the Crusades expansion that introduced the new system that gave mounted warriors 12 points, light non-armored characters get 8 points, and armored foot warriors get 6. And this change was commonly accepted as canon for the Cry Havoc community, and it is used since today in the modern versions of the game as well. So, if you will ever try to get the vassal module for Cry Havoc, you will find that they all have these modern versions of movement points. Of course, if you will get a paper version of the original edition of Cry Havoc, you will find that they are lowered. But even if you will try to make the game by yourself, by downloading counters and boards from the web, so the best scans that you will find have this newer version of movement points. So I think I will stay with this new version of the movement points to make everything easier and more clear. But remember, this is not the original version of the movement points. They were slightly lower in the original version. So, in the movement phase, you are free to move all your units. There are no limits when it comes to the movement. You can move as many warriors as you like. There is only one exception. If you have any crossbowmen and they fired in their second step of the game, they cannot move. So it is a good idea that if you have any crossbowmen, to mark them in some way, to remember that if they are fired, they cannot make movement. Otherwise, all your units can move as they like, spending their movement points according to the terrain types table that tells us how many movement points you have to pay when you are entering a certain kind of terrain. Cost is mostly the same for both mounted and for foot warriors, but you can see that certain terrains are impossible for horsemen, and when it comes to the basic number of points, you spend the same. This is one of the major differences between Cry Havoc and, for example, Norman Saga, where there is various cost for the leg and mounted characters when it comes to movement. And now, you have to move one of your characters first before you will go to the other character. So you can't simply make a move of 1 and 2, and then 1 and 2, and then 1 and 2 again. No, you have to finish your movement with one character before you will start to move the second one. I guess this is pretty obvious, but I guess it is better to state it for now. And when you are entering the hex, you need to check how many movement points you need to pay for entering it. For example, for slope, you need to spend 2 movement points. For scrap, the same. So, for example, if it will be 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, 6, 7, 8. And that would be the end of his movement. There are no zones of control in this game, and there are no limitations for moving around enemy characters. So, for example, if this knight will be an enemy of this archer. He can move as he likes around him, and there are no obstacles when it comes to this. There is no zone of control or no infiltration rules like in Norman Saga. I think this is one of the major flaws of this game, because it makes you able to move freely on board any way you like, save to the very limited positions where you can block the enemy movement with only a few of your characters. For example, here you can simply block this way with 2 of your warriors, and no one can go there, save to this building. Or you can do the same here. Again, this way is blocked, and it's blocked for good, because well, if you want to go here, you need to here or say there. So there are no ways to block enemy movement with your own characters apart from blocking the entire way, because it is not possible to move through the enemy characters. It is possible to move through your friendly characters. There is no limitation for that, save to the one: you cannot end your movement on the hex with another living character. You can end your movement on the hex with dead character, and the only limit is that there have to be less than 6 characters on the hex. If there are 6 dead bodies on the hex becomes impossible, and you cannot move through such hex. And same goes to dead horses. If there are 2 dead horses on board on hex, or horse and 3 dead bodies, this hex becomes impossible and you cannot move through this. If there are 3 bodies or 1 horse on the hex, the cost of the hex is doubled. So let's assume that this sergeant wants to go, and we have scrap. That scrap costs us 2 movement points, so he moves 1, 2, and then normally he would pay 2 for another scrap, but since there is a horse, he needs to spend 4 movement points to move on this hex. So that's quite important. And now we have windows and doors. And when it comes to doors, you can move through the doors freely with your leg warriors, but when it comes to mounted warriors, you can move on the hex with doors only, but you cannot move anywhere deeper on in the building with your mounted warrior. He needs to dismount first before he will go inside the building. And same goes to windows. You cannot move through the window with mounted character. I guess this is again quite obvious, but well, let's make it clear. Horses cannot move through the 3 hexes as well. So these are important limitations for horsemen, and that's why horsemen sometimes likes to dismount to move somewhere where they cannot normally go. And finally, when it comes to windows, you can move through the windows, of course, but you have to spend a couple of movement points for such a move. When you are moving through the window, you need to spend 3 movement points. So, for example, you have a wounded character in armor, and you can see that he has only 3 movement points. This means that he cannot move through the window. Why? Because he would have to spend 3 movement points for window and 1 movement point to occupy this hex. So you need to have at last 4 movement points to move through the window, otherwise it is off limits for you. And let's return to the mounted characters. As probably some of you may know, in the Norman Saga we have a lot of limitations when it comes to the mounted characters' movement. In this game there are no such limitations. Mounted characters may move as they like. I tend to use the basic rules from the Norman Saga. I mean, you can only take one of the 3 front hexes. You cannot, for example, move, let's say, like that, when you were here. You can only take one of the front hexes. I guess this makes a bit more sense than rounding up and down as you like. Like I said, this game is very simple if you would compare even with Norman Saga, which is not very complicated game too. But remember, there are no limits for movement. Of course, the only limit is the limit of movement points. This is pretty normal. But let's go back to the mounted warriors. They can mount and dismount. Of course, they can be dismounted if they are kicked off the horse during the combat, but they can also mount and dismount during the game. If they want to mount and dismount, they need to spend the entire turn without doing nothing. And then they are placed next to their horse, and then we have to change the mounted warrior counter onto the horse. The horses are very nicely drawn. Well, in general, this game has amazing graphics, so it is always easy to tell to whom such horse belong. And horses itself are not moving. They are simply staying on the hex where they were left, and they are do not make any movement, but they can be led by the bridle. So, for example, if you have your character here and there is a horse near, adjacent to you, you can move your character, and the horse follows you in the same way. And when it comes to animals, there are also pack mules included in this game, and they can be led in the same fashion as horse. So your character moves and mule follows him. And they can be led alone, just like here on this horse, or they can be led in the string. You can have couple of your pack mules on the string, and they are moving together one after another. So let's say that they are on the string, so he goes there, and these mules are following him in such a way. So this is important because mules play quite an important role in certain scenarios in this game. So I guess that would be all when it comes to the movement rules. Like I say, they are very easy. Like I say, sometimes too easy. That's why I prefer rules from Norman Saga in general, because they add another layer of rules, and they make movement or combat a bit more realistic than they were in the Cry Havoc. Well, Cry Havoc was made to have fun. Remember about it. This game never wanted to be a perfect simulation of the medieval skirmish. Authors claim it clearly, that they wanted to make a simple game just to give people fun. Of course, there came a lot of expansions and other games that added their own rules, and you can find all of them in the Magna Carta that has all the rules for all the games of Cry Havoc gathered together and cleared. So that would be all when it comes to the movement in Cry Havoc.